Two siblings commit the same sin. They speak against Moses. They question his authority. God descends in a pillar of cloud, furious, and when the cloud lifts, only one of them is covered in leprosy. Miriam turns white as snow. Aaron remains untouched. The same offense, two radically different consequences, and the Bible does not explain why. The episode is recorded in Numbers chapter 12. It is short, only 16 verses. But in those 16 verses lies hidden one of the most misunderstood divine decisions in the entire Old Testament. Generations of readers have passed through this text and emerged with the same question: is this fair? Theologians debated for centuries. Commentators offered explanations ranging from convincing to absurd. Some said Miriam was punished because she was a woman. Others alleged divine favoritism toward Aaron. Others simply admitted they did not understand and moved on. But the answer exists. It is hidden in grammatical details of the original Hebrew. It is in the institutional functions each one held. And it is, above all, in what happened to Aaron in the following years. Because when you examine the complete story, not just this isolated chapter, the apparent injustice transforms into something far more complex and far more terrifying. To understand what really happened that day in the wilderness of Paran, you need to go back decades. You need to know who Miriam was before she became leprous. You need to understand Aaron's position before seeing him escape judgment. And you need to examine the original Hebrew text, because hidden there is a detail that completely changes the reading of this story. Miriam was not just any woman in Israel. She was the first person to protect Moses when he was still a baby, condemned to death. Pharaoh had ordered that all newborn Hebrew boys be thrown into the Nile. Jochebed, Moses' mother, hid her son for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she placed the baby in a basket of bulrushes waterproofed with bitumen and pitch, and left it among the reeds at the river's edge. But she did not abandon him completely. She sent someone to watch from a distance. Exodus chapter 2, verse 4. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Miriam was probably 7 or 8 years old, a slave child, and she stood there watching, waiting, not knowing if she would see her brother devoured by crocodiles, drowned by the current, or discovered by Egyptian soldiers. What she saw was different. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river. She saw the basket. She sent her maid to fetch it. She opened it and found the baby crying. She immediately recognized he was one of the Hebrew children, and she had compassion. At that moment, Miriam did something extraordinary. With an absurd courage for a slave child standing before Egyptian royalty, she approached and made a proposal. Exodus 2, verse 7. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? The princess agreed, and Miriam ran to call her own mother. Think about the magnitude of that moment. A slave girl negotiating with the daughter of the most powerful man in the world, risking her own life by revealing herself as a Hebrew connected to that forbidden baby, and managing not only to save her brother, but to have him raised by his own mother, paid by Pharaoh's palace. If Miriam had stayed hidden, if she had fled in fear, if she had remained silent, Moses would have been raised exclusively as an Egyptian. He would not have learned Hebrew traditions. He would not have heard about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He would not have known the God of his fathers. The history of Israel would have been completely different. 80 years later, when Israel finally crossed the Red Sea and saw the Egyptian armies drowned in the waters, it was Miriam who led the celebration. Exodus chapter 15, verse 20 explicitly calls her a prophetess. Not a poet, not a leader, a prophetess. The highest title a person could receive in Israel, indicating direct communication with God. She took a tambourine. All the women of Israel went out after her with tambourines and dancing. And Miriam sang the refrain that would echo for generations, "Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea." This scene is significant for several reasons. First, it shows Miriam exercising public leadership accepted by all the people. Second, it reveals she had recognized spiritual authority, not just social. Third, it indicates her influence over the women of Israel was absolute. When Miriam took up the tambourine, the others followed. The prophet Micah, centuries later, would confirm her position. Micah chapter 6, verse 4. "For I brought thee up out of the land of Egypt, and redeemed thee out of the house of servants, and I sent before thee Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." God placed all three at the same level of leadership: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, the triad that led Israel from Egypt to the wilderness. Prophetess, leader, national heroine, that was Miriam. Aaron had his own history of greatness, equally impressive. When Moses returned from the wilderness of Midian, with the mission to free Israel, he complained to God that he did not know how to speak well. Exodus chapter 4 records the conversation. Moses argued he was slow of speech and slow of tongue. Some scholars believe he had some kind of stutter or articulation difficulty. Others think it was just insecurity after 40 years isolated in the desert. God responded by designating Aaron as spokesman. Exodus 4, verses 14 to 16. "Is not Aaron the Levite thy brother? I know that he can speak well, and thou shalt speak unto him, and put words in his mouth. And he shall be thy spokesman unto the people, and he shall be to thee instead of a mouth, and thou shalt be to him instead of God." During all the plagues of Egypt, Aaron stood at Moses' side. It was he who stretched out the rod over the Nile and turned water into blood. It was he who stretched out his hand over the rivers and made frogs cover the land. It was he who struck the dust of the earth and produced lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Aaron was not an assistant. He was co-executor of the miracles. The rod in his hands had the same power as the rod in Moses' hands, and when the time came to establish the priesthood, God chose Aaron, not Moses. Aaron would be the first high priest of Israel, the only man authorized to enter the Holy of Holies once a year, the mediator between 2 million people and the God of the universe. Exodus chapter 28 describes Aaron's priestly garments in luxurious detail. The breastplate with 12 precious stones, the ephod embroidered with gold, blue, purple, and scarlet, the mitre with the plate of pure gold engraved with "Holiness to the Lord." No other Israelite wore that. No other Israelite could wear it. Aaron carried the names of the 12 tribes over his heart when he entered the presence of God. Literally, the stones of the breastplate represented each tribe, and he bore them as a continual memorial before the Lord. These were the two accusers of Moses. They were not ordinary people murmuring on the periphery of the camp. They were Moses' older sister and older brother, the two leaders closest to him, the two who had been present from the beginning, the two who had legitimate and recognized divine callings. And what did they say? The text begins with an apparently domestic accusation. Numbers chapter 12, verse 1. "And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman." Ethiopian meant Cushite, a dark-skinned woman, probably from the region we know today as Sudan or Ethiopia. Some scholars believe this was Zipporah, Moses' Midianite wife, being called by another geographical term. Midian and Cush had close borders, and the terms sometimes overlapped. Other scholars believe Moses had taken a second wife after Zipporah's death, or after some unrecorded separation. Zipporah appears for the last time in Exodus 18, when Jethro brings her back to Moses. After that, she disappears from the text. There is no record of her death or divorce. The text does not clarify which interpretation is correct, and perhaps that is intentional, because the criticism about the wife was only a pretext. Verse 2 reveals the real issue. And they said, "Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us?" There lay the core of the rebellion. It was not about marriage, it was not about ethnicity. It was not about the Cushite wife. It was about authority. It was about position. It was about professional and spiritual jealousy. Miriam was a prophetess. Aaron was high priest. Both had legitimate divine callings. Both heard from God. Both exercised recognized leadership over Israel. But Moses had something they did not have: an intimacy with God that no other living human being possessed. Verse 3 interrupts the narrative to explain something crucial. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. This parenthetical observation is not accidental. It is there to explain why Moses did not defend himself. Meekness in Hebrew, anav, did not mean weakness or passivity. It meant absence of arrogance. It meant not needing to prove anything to anyone. It meant being so secure in one's own identity before God that human attacks did not provoke a defensive reaction. When his own siblings questioned his authority, Moses remained silent. He did not argue. He did not counterattack. He did not list his credentials. He did not remind them who had faced Pharaoh, parted the sea, received the law at Sinai. And it was exactly this silence that provoked God's direct intervention. Because when the servant does not defend himself, the Lord defends. Verse 4, "And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam, Come out ye three unto the tabernacle of the congregation." The word suddenly indicates immediacy. God did not wait. He did not let the offense pass. He did not give time for spontaneous repentance. He called an emergency meeting at that very instant. The three went out, and the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. It was no ordinary cloud. It was the visible manifestation of God's presence, the same cloud that guided Israel by day, the same one that rested upon the tabernacle, the same one that had descended upon Sinai amid thunder and lightning. God called Aaron and Miriam to come forward. Moses stayed where he was, and what followed was one of the most direct rebukes recorded in Scripture. Verses 6 to 8. "Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches, and the similitude of the Lord shall he behold." God explained the prophetic hierarchy unequivocally. Common prophets received indirect revelation, visions, dreams, images that needed interpretation, riddles that required discernment. Moses was different. Moses received direct communication, mouth to mouth, clearly, without riddles. And even more extraordinary, Moses beheld the similitude of the Lord. The Hebrew word used, temuna, suggests a likeness, a visible manifestation. Moses saw something of God that no other prophet saw. And then came the question that must have frozen the blood of Miriam and Aaron. "Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? Were ye not afraid?" The accusation was of lack of reverence, of absence of holy fear, of sinful audacity in touching God's anointed. Verse 9, "And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed." The cloud withdrew from above the tabernacle, and when Aaron turned to look at Miriam, she was leprous, white as snow. The Hebrew term used, zarath, is often translated as leprosy, but it does not correspond exactly to modern Hansen's disease. It was a broader category of skin diseases that rendered a person ritually unclean. The detail white as snow indicates a particularly severe form, where the skin lost all pigmentation and healthy appearance. Here is the moment that generates all the questions. Both spoke, both questioned, both were in the same meeting, hearing the same rebuke. but only Miriam came out marked. Aaron immediately panicked. Verse 11, "And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned." Notice several details in that sentence. First, Aaron called Moses, "my Lord." The same older brother who minutes before questioned whether God spoke only through Moses now recognized his authority. Second, Aaron said, "Lay not the sin upon us." He knew he was guilty too. He knew he deserved punishment. He admitted participation. Third, Aaron asked Moses, not God. He understood Moses had intercessory power that he himself did not possess. Verse 12, "Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed, when he cometh out of his mother's womb." The description is grotesque. Aaron compared Miriam's condition to a stillborn in decomposition. The leprosy was so advanced, so visible, so disfiguring, that she looked like someone whose body was already rotting while alive. And Moses, the meekest man on earth, the same one who had been attacked by his siblings minutes before, did not hesitate. Verse 13, "And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee." The prayer was short, 5 words in Hebrew. El narefanala, God, please, heal her, please. Moses did not hold resentment. He did not bring up the offense. He did not demand apologies first. He immediately interceded for the sister who had just attacked him. God's response came with an unexpected comparison. Verse 14, "And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again." Spitting in someone's face was a sign of extreme disapproval and humiliation in ancient culture. God compared his own reaction to the reaction of a father who spits in the face of a rebellious daughter. The daughter would be ashamed for 7 days. Miriam would be isolated for 7 days. Verse 15, "And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not till Miriam was brought in again." 7 days. Miriam remained outside the camp for 7 days, leprous, alone, ashamed, and all the people of Israel waited. 2 million people did not move until she was brought back in. The entire journey stopped because of her, but Aaron had nothing. No leprosy, no isolation, no visible mark. He continued serving as high priest the next day, as if nothing had happened. Here begins the investigative work that few undertake. The first detail is hidden in the original Hebrew text. Verse 1 of Numbers 12 in most translations says, "Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses." It seems the two acted equally. It seems like joint action, simultaneous, equivalent, but the Hebrew tells a different story. The verb to speak in Hebrew is dabar, and in this verse the verb is conjugated as vataber, which is third-person feminine singular in the consecutive imperfect. Not masculine, not plural, feminine singular. This means that grammatically, Miriam is the main subject of the action. She spoke. Aaron is mentioned, but as a secondary participant. The Hebrew structure places Miriam as the primary agent and Aaron as someone who joined in, agreed, participated passively. This grammatical construction is not an accident. Biblical Hebrew is extremely precise on matters of verbal gender and number. When 2 subjects perform an action together and equally, the verb goes to the plural. When one subject leads and another follows, the verb agrees with the leader. There are examples of this throughout the Bible. When Abraham and Sarah act together, the verbs reflect who initiated the action. When mixed groups of men and women do something, the Hebrew indicates whether the action was collective or led by one party. In this case, Miriam was the instigator. Aaron was the accomplice. She started the murmuring. She raised the questions about the Cushite wife. She articulated the complaint about prophetic authority. She nurtured the resentment that had probably been growing for some time. Aaron listened, agreed, participated vocally, but did not initiate. For God, who knows not only actions but motivations, this distinction mattered fundamentally. The heart that conceives rebellion is not equal to the heart that merely joins it. Both are guilty. Both sinned, but not equally guilty, not equally responsible. There is a second factor that almost no one considers when reading this text: Aaron's institutional position. He was not just Moses' brother. He was the high priest of Israel, the only high priest. There was no trained substitute. There was no prepared successor. His sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, were still learning basic priestly functions. None of them had been anointed for the highest position. If Aaron contracted leprosy, what would happen to Israel? Leviticus chapters 13 and 14 detail the laws of leprosy exhaustively. A leper was declared unclean. He had to live outside the camp. He had to tear his clothes, leave his head uncovered, and cry, "Unclean, unclean," when anyone approached. He could not participate in any religious ceremony. He could not touch anything holy. He could not approach the tabernacle. He could not enter the presence of God. Now consider the institutional problem. The high priest was the only one who could enter the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16 describes the ritual. Once a year, on the 10th day of the 7th month, the high priest entered beyond the veil, carrying sacrificial blood to make atonement for the sins of all the people. No one else could do this. No one. The high priest was the only one who could consult the Urim and Thummim, the sacred objects in the breastplate that provided divine guidance in critical national decisions. The high priest was the only one who could sprinkle blood upon the mercy seat, the cover of the Ark of the Covenant where God's presence dwelt. The high priest was the mediator between 2 million people and God when someone sinned and needed an atoning sacrifice. If Aaron became leprous, the entire sacrificial system of Israel would collapse immediately. There would be no one to enter the Holy of Holies. There would be no one to make atonement for the people. There would be no mediator. There would be no way of reconciliation when someone sinned. And how long did the uncleanness of leprosy last? Not 7 days. Leprosy could last weeks, months, years, sometimes a lifetime. There was no guaranteed cure. The person remained isolated until a priest examined and declared the disease had passed. And who would examine Aaron if he was the only qualified high priest? God did not spare Aaron out of favoritism. It was not personal preference. It was not arbitrary mercy while Miriam suffered unjustly. God spared Israel from a spiritual and institutional catastrophe. The function protected the man, not because he deserved protection, but because the people depended on the function. 2 million people in the wilderness needed a functioning mediator. The sacrificial system needed to continue operating. The religious structure God had just established at Sinai could not collapse because of one man's punishment. This does not mean Aaron escaped unpunished. It means his punishment was delayed and transformed. And here is the third factor that changes the entire perspective of this story. Miriam's punishment was visible, immediate, and temporary. 7 days of leprosy, 7 days outside the camp. Afterward, complete healing, total reintegration, normal life continued. Aaron's punishment came later, and it was invisible, prolonged, and devastating. A few chapters before Numbers 12 in Leviticus 10, something terrible had happened. Aaron's 2 eldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, offered strange fire before the Lord. Leviticus 10, verse 1. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took either of them his censer, and put fire therein, and put incense thereon, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he commanded them not. strange fire, fire that God had not commanded, perhaps incense prepared with wrong ingredients, perhaps fire taken from an unauthorized source instead of the altar, perhaps an offering made at the wrong time or in the wrong manner. The text does not specify exactly what the error was. It specifies only the consequence. Verse 2, "And there went out fire from the Lord, and devoured them, and they died before the Lord." Aaron watched 2 sons burned to death in the same tabernacle where he served, before the same God he represented, on the same day that should have been a celebration of the inauguration of priestly service. And the command that came next was perhaps the cruelest a father could receive. Leviticus 10 verse 6, "And Moses said unto Aaron, and unto Eleazar, and unto Ithamar his sons, Uncover not your heads, neither rend your clothes, lest ye die, and lest wrath come upon all the people." Aaron could not mourn his own sons. He could not uncover his head as a sign of grief, as was the custom. He could not tear his garments in expression of sorrow, as every Israelite did when losing someone beloved. He had to continue serving in the tabernacle while the bodies were still being removed. Verse 3 records Aaron's reaction, "And Aaron held his peace." 4 words in English, 2 in Hebrew, Vidum Aharon. Aaron remained silent. That silence carried the weight of forbidden grief, the pain of a father who could not express his pain, the anguish of serving God in the same place where God had just killed his sons. Miriam carried leprosy on her skin for 7 days. Aaron carried silent grief in his heart for the rest of his life. She was punished with temporary disease that had complete healing. He was punished with permanent loss that would never be reversed. Nadab and Abihu would not return. The forced silence would leave invisible scars that no priestly examination could ever declare healed. And it did not end there. Years later, the rebellion at the waters of Meribah brought final consequences for Moses and Aaron. Numbers 20 records the episode. The people complained about lack of water. God commanded Moses to speak to the rock. Moses, frustrated with the constant murmuring, struck the rock twice with the rod instead of speaking. Water came out, the people drank, but God was not satisfied. Numbers 20, verse 12. "And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel. Therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them." Moses and Aaron were excluded from the promised land. After 40 years leading Israel through the wilderness, after everything they had sacrificed and endured, they would not enter, and Aaron's death came shortly after. Numbers 20, verses 23 to 28, describe the scene. God commanded Moses to take Aaron and Eleazar up Mount Hor. At the top of the mountain, Moses removed Aaron's priestly garments and put them on Eleazar. The transfer of authority happened there, on the heights, away from the people. And Aaron died at the top of Mount Hor, seeing the promised land from afar, unable to set foot in it, unable to enter. After everything, when you place the 3 destinies side by side, the mathematics of divine justice begins to make completely different sense. Miriam. 7 days of leprosy, complete healing, continued the journey with Israel, died at Kadesh in the 40th year with no record of additional punishment or exclusion from the promised land. Aaron, sons dead before his eyes, grief forbidden from being expressed, exclusion from the promised land, death in exile at the top of a mountain, seeing from afar what he would never touch. Moses, exclusion from the promised land, death on Mount Nebo, seeing Canaan from afar, buried by God in an unknown location. Miriam's immediate and visible punishment was the lightest of the 3. The apparent mercy toward Aaron on the day of the leprosy was merely postponement of far heavier consequences. If you could choose between 7 days of leprosy with complete healing or decades of silent grief culminating in death in exile, which would you choose? there is yet another angle that deserves careful consideration. Miriam, as a woman in Israel, had no official priestly function. Her influence was prophetic and social. She led the women. She sang, she prophesied, but she did not mediate sacrifices. She did not enter the tabernacle to minister. She did not carry on her shoulders the institutional responsibility of keeping 2 million people connected to God through daily rituals. When Miriam sinned, she could be isolated for 7 days without the national religious system stopping. The people waited for her, yes, the journey stopped. But it was inconvenience, not catastrophe. No one failed to have their sins atoned because Miriam was outside the camp. Aaron was irreplaceable at that specific moment. His contamination would not affect only him. It would affect every person who needed sacrifice during his impurity, every unatoned sin, every unpresented offering, every reconciliation made impossible, every consultation of the Urim and Thummim that could not be made. God did not apply blind justice. He applied contextualized justice. He considered who did what, who started and who followed, what position each one held, what the immediate and long-term consequences would be for the entire people of each type of punishment. This is not favoritism, it is governmental wisdom. A human judge who applied the same sentence to the mastermind and to the executor of a crime would be lazy, not just. A doctor who gave the same medicine in the same dosage to patients with different conditions would be negligent, not egalitarian. A general who punished the enlisted soldier and the commander the same way for the same error would be ignoring that different responsibilities generate different culpabilities. God saw Miriam and saw a prophetess who initiated murmuring out of jealousy over her younger brother's position. He applied a visible, painful, humiliating, but temporary correction. Something she would feel in her skin, literally, and never forget. Something all Israel would see and learn from. Something that would remain recorded in Scripture as a warning for future generations. God saw Aaron and saw a high priest who yielded to pressure from his older sister, agreed with what he should not have agreed with, participated vocally in something he did not initiate. God also saw a man whose function was indispensable for the spiritual functioning of the entire nation at that moment. He spared immediate punishment because the people needed him operational, but he did not spare the punishment. Years later, when Aaron watched his sons die by fire and could not weep, he must have remembered Miriam white as snow. He must have remembered his own momentary relief at not being touched that day in the wilderness of Paran. And he must have understood that there is no escaping God's justice. There is only the time and manner God chooses to apply it. When he climbed Mount Hor to die, when he felt Moses removing the priestly garments from his body and placing them on Eleazar, when he looked toward the promised land, knowing he would never set foot in it, Aaron had plenty of time to reflect on whether he had really escaped anything that distant day when only Miriam became leprous. The biblical text is economical. It does not explain all the reasons. It does not justify every divine decision to satisfy human curiosity. But when you examine carefully, when you compare complete trajectories instead of isolated moments, when you study the original Hebrew instead of depending only on translations, when you consider institutional functions and systemic consequences, the patterns emerge. Miriam was not treated more severely than Aaron. She was treated with different severity. Visible versus invisible, immediate versus prolonged, temporary versus permanent, curable versus irreversible. The apparent injustice of Numbers 12 only exists when you read the chapter isolated from the rest of the narrative. When you read the entire story, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, when you follow the destiny of each of the 3 siblings to the end, God's justice reveals itself in all its terrifying complexity. He does not forget, he does not ignore, he does not turn a blind eye, he does not let things slide. He calibrates each response to each person's heart, to each one's position, to the consequences for everyone involved, to the right moment to apply each correction. Miriam learned her lesson in 7 days of isolation and public humiliation. She lived the rest of her life with no record of new rebellion against Moses. She died at Kadesh, and the text simply records her death without mentioning exclusion from the promised land or additional punishment. Aaron carried the weight of a priesthood stained by his weakness. He saw his lineage cut off by the death of Nadab and Abihu. He served in silence for decades, knowing he had failed at critical moments. He died contemplating from afar what he would not reach, stripped of the garments that defined him, transferring to his son the authority he could not exercise with complete integrity. The question is not why God punished Miriam and not Aaron. The question is why we assume we know what punishment is and what mercy is before seeing the story end. Sometimes immediate discipline is the most merciful act that exists. It hurts now, heals quickly, moves forward with the lesson learned. Sometimes the absence of immediate discipline is the harbinger of something far worse. The bill was not forgiven, it was only postponed, with compound interest accumulating silently. When you look at situations that seem unjust, when you question why one person suffered visible consequences while another apparently escaped unscathed, remember Miriam and Aaron. Remember that you are seeing one frame of a movie that has not yet ended. Remember that the verb in the feminine singular hides information that the translation does not capture. Remember that institutional functions create responsibilities and protections that individuals without function do not possess. Remember that delayed consequences are frequently amplified consequences. And remember, above all, that the God who inspired every word of the Hebrew text, who chose every verbal conjugation, who recorded every detail for future generations, is the same God who knows every motivation of the human heart before words even leave the mouth. He does not need to explain himself, but when you study carefully, the explanations are there, hidden in feminine singular verbs, in irreplaceable priestly functions, in deaths of sons that would come like fire from heaven, in mountains where men would die seeing from afar what they would never reach. No one escapes God's justice. His justice is not blind, it is omniscient. It sees what no one sees, it knows what no one knows, it weighs what no one can weigh. And that is infinitely more terrifying than any temporary leprosy.